Listen carefully, because this is the line that separates traders who disappear from traders who build something permanent. Most of you are renting your trades. You're borrowing conviction, leasing ideas, trading on second-hand belief, and just like a tenant who never owns the property, you walk away with nothing when the market changes its mood. That's why your profits feel temporary, because they are. I learned this the expensive way. I lost fortunes renting confidence. I built them back when I understood that every dollar earned without ownership is borrowed money. When I was young, working around the old tape rooms, I noticed a pattern. The loudest men rarely lasted. The ones chasing tips burned out fast. The survivors were quiet. They studied, they formed their own conclusions, and when they acted with a calm that came from understanding. They weren't guessing. They knew why they were in the trade. Most of you don't. That's why you get shaken out before the move. Why you take profits too early. Why you hold losers hoping they'll forgive you. You never owned the position. You entered on someone else's certainty. The moment price moved against you, fear took over because you had no foundation. The market senses that weakness. It always does. I remember the first time I truly owned a trade. I'd studied a stock for months, watched its rhythm, understood how it breathed. When the setup came, I didn't hesitate. Not because I was reckless, but because I had earned conviction through observation and pain. That trade was mine. The profit wasn't luck. It was the reward for preparation. Conviction is not given. It cannot be downloaded. It cannot be copied from a chat room or borrowed from a newsletter. It's forged in screen time. Burned into your nerves through losses. Built by waiting when others are gambling. Most traders want results without the furnace. They want certainty handed to them. But certainty handed to you collapses the moment pressure appears. Only self-built conviction survives stress. When you rent a trade, every tick feels personal. You panic because you don't understand what you're holding. You don't know if the thesis is intact. You don't know whether to add or exit. You're trapped inside someone else's logic. That is helplessness disguised as participation. I watched traders make fortunes on tips. I also watched them lose everything because they never learned to think independently. They were profitable tenants, but they never became owners. And in this business, tenants get evicted. Ownership changes everything. When you own the trade, you know the reason you're there. You know what proves you right. You know what proves you wrong. Price movement becomes information, not emotion. You stop reacting. You start evaluating. This is the difference between gambling and operating. The trades that built real wealth were not frequent. They were rare, clear, earned, backed by study, backed by patience. I waited longer than most people believed was sane. But when the moment arrived, I acted with size because the work was already done. Ownership allows patience. Renting creates urgency. Urgency is the enemy of survival. The trader who rents must constantly trade to feel secure. He jumps from idea to idea, searching for reassurance. The owner can sit still. Waiting is not painful when you understand what you're waiting for. That stillness is power, and power in trading is quiet. Most of your stress comes from trading positions you don't understand deeply enough to hold. The mind rebels when it senses uncertainty. It screams for escape. It invents reasons to exit. That isn't bad luck. That's psychological debt being collected. When you own your analysis, the noise fades. You look at the chart and ask one question. Has the reason for the trade changed? Not whether you feel good, not whether others agree, only whether the structure you built still stands. If it stands, you hold. If it breaks, you exit. No drama. That level of clarity cannot be rented. It must be constructed. Ownership also means responsibility. Total responsibility. No blaming signals. No blaming mentors. No blaming the market. If you enter, it's yours. If you lose, the lesson is yours. And that lesson compounds into skill. Renters repeat mistakes. Owners evolve. There is another truth most traders misunderstand. Ownership does not mean recklessness. Conviction is not betting everything. It is controlled scaling, adding only when the market confirms your reasoning. Strength deserves size. Hope deserves nothing. Without ownership, you cannot distinguish confirmation from noise. You are guessing inside volatility. With ownership, you recognize alignment. You act with precision instead of desperation. This is how accounts grow without destroying the mind that manages them. The psychological difference is enormous. A rented trade feels like a hostage situation. An owned trade feels like a decision. You may still lose. Loss is part of the profession. But the loss teaches instead of traumatizes. That distinction determines longevity. The market is not impressed by how many trades you take. It is impressed by how deeply you understand the few you choose. Activity is not progress. Understanding is progress. Most traders are addicted to activity. They want motion because silence exposes their lack of clarity. They trade to avoid thinking. They rent trades to avoid responsibility. And the market charges rent every day. Ownership is uncomfortable at first. It forces you to admit what you don't know. It forces you to slow down. It forces you to build frameworks instead of chasing excitement. But inside that discomfort is freedom. Freedom from panic. Freedom from noise. Freedom from dependency. When you truly own your process, outside opinions lose their grip. News becomes background. Crowd emotion becomes irrelevant. You are no longer pulled in every direction. You move according to your structure. Structure is survival, and survival is the foundation of wealth. The traders who last decades are not the most aggressive. They are the most self-directed. They built internal authority. They trust their work because they did the work. That trust is invisible to spectators, but it is visible in their equity curve. Ownership is not glamorous. It is quiet discipline repeated daily. Study, wait, decide, accept consequence, refine. Again and again. That repetition builds something renters never touch, independence. And independence is the only true edge that cannot be copied. The market will always transfer money from those who depend and others to those who depend on themselves. That is not philosophy. That is mechanics. So the real question is simple. When you sit down to trade, whose mind are you using? Yours or someone else's? Because only one of those minds will still be standing 10 years from now. Stop renting decisions. Stop renting conviction. Build your own. Own the trade before you enter it. Own the risk. Own the outcome. That is the path.